There are moments in your life that act as architectural supports, load-bearing beams disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. You don't recognize their structural importance at the time. They feel flimsy, incidental, a passing shadow on the wall. It's only years later, when you look back at the edifice of your own history, that you see them for what they were. The precise points where the entire direction of your life shifted, where the ceiling did not collapse, where a new room was built without your conscious consent. For me, so many of those moments looked like Alex. They looked like the curve of his shoulder as he slept, the particular way his hair fell across the worn corduroy of our sofa, the sound of his breathing, a slow and steady tide in the quiet coastal town of our living room. This moment, the one that I now understand as the keystone in the arch, was one of those. He was asleep, his head resting not on a cushion, but in my lap, a territory he had claimed with the casual, unconscious entitlement of someone who knows, on some cellular level, that they will not be turned away. The television murmured on, casting flickering blue and silver light across his face, sculpting hollows where there were none, and smoothing the worry lines that had taken up residence between his brows these past few months. I had my camera on the coffee table, a silent witness, its lens a single, unblinking eye. My profession, my entire way of seeing the world, was about capturing moments like this, freezing them in silver nitrate and memory. I framed them, I composed them, I found the story in the light. But this was different. This wasn't a story to be told. It was a space to be inhabited, and I was terrified of breathing too loudly, of shifting my weight, of doing anything that might disturb the fragile ecosystem of this piece. My hand hovered in the air above his head, a stalled satellite, caught in the gravitational pull of his stillness. I wanted, with an ache that was so profound it felt like a physical part of my anatomy, to touch him, to smooth away the tension from his forehead, to trace the line of his jaw, to feel the soft bristles of his late-day stubble against my fingertips. But I did not. I had spent years learning the geometry of our friendship, the precise angles of acceptable closeness, the established boundaries that kept us safe, that kept me safe. And this, his head in my lap, was already a catastrophic violation of all known principles. It had started so gradually, this erosion of boundaries, that I had almost convinced myself I was imagining it. A slow, tectonic shift in the landscape of our shared life. Alex, who had always been a self-contained universe of kinetic energy, a whirlwind of practice and classes, and a social life that left contrails in its wake, had begun to slow. The relentless pressure of Olympic trials had started to sand him down, wearing away his brilliant, polished exterior to reveal something more raw and vulnerable beneath. He was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix, a weariness that had settled deep in his bones. And in his exhaustion, he had begun to drift, to lean, to seek a quiet harbor. I had, it seemed, become his harbor. And a harbor does not move. A harbor simply is. It accepts the ships that come to it, offering stillness and quiet water, asking for nothing in return. It was a role I had played for years, the calm observer to his brilliant motion. But now, the ship was not just docking. It was dropping anchor in the deepest part of me, and I was afraid of the ropes, of the chains, of the sheer, immovable weight of it all. His hand, which had been resting on his own chest, twitched in his sleep, his fingers uncurling and then settling again. I watched the minute movement, my own heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Every breath he took felt like a question I did not know how to answer. The air in the room was thick with unspoken things, with years of carefully curated silence and deflected feelings. This quiet intimacy was a language we had never learned to speak, and I feared we were both disastrously fluent in misunderstanding its syntax. He murmured something, a soft, incoherent syllable that was swallowed by the fabric of my jeans. He shifted, pressing his cheek more firmly against my thigh, a small, seeking gesture that undid me completely. In that moment, the years of patient friendship, of being the supportive roommate, the reliable constant, all of it felt like a flimsy disguise for this one, singular, terrifying truth. I loved him. It was a fact as solid and irrefutable as the floor beneath my feet, and just as capable of being pulled out from under me without warning. And holding him like this, in the quiet sanctuary of our apartment, felt like standing on a precipice, the long fall into confession just a single, careless word away. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to simply feel the reality of it. The warmth of him seeping through the denim, the faint, clean scent of his shampoo, the soft weight of his trust. This was the moment. This was the architectural support. And I knew, with a certainty that was both a comfort and a terror, that the entire structure of my life was now resting upon it. The only question was whether it would hold, or if we were all about to come crashing down. To understand the weight of that evening on the couch, you would have to understand the foundation upon which it was built. You would have to go back to the beginning, to the echoing, chlorinated cathedral of the university natatorium. I was not a swimmer. I was the opposite of a swimmer. I was a creature of dry land, of still images and quiet observation decks. I had a work-study job as the athletics department photographer, a position that gave me a backstage pass to a world of disciplined motion I could only ever witness through a lens. I spent my days documenting the triumphs and agonies of others, my evenings smelling faintly of chlorine and developing chemicals. I was a ghost in the machine, my presence noted but rarely engaged with. I captured the explosive grace of the divers, the grim determination of the water polo team, and the sleek, powerful rhythm of the swimmers. And that is where I first saw Alex. He was impossible to miss. Even in a pool full of athletes carved from marble, he stood out. It wasn't just his form, which was technically perfect, a beautiful, efficient engine cutting through the water. It was something else. A light, an energy, a kind of joyous power that seemed to emanate from him even when he was just standing on the block, shaking the water from his hair. He moved like he was born in water, and on land, he carried that same fluid grace. Our first real conversation was mundane, forgettable to anyone but me. I was packing up my gear after a long practice, my fingers cold and clumsy on the latches of my camera case. He was toweling off his hair, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched me struggle. He walked over, smelling of chlorine and victory, and simply took the case from me. He closed the latches with 2 easy, decisive clicks. "You look like you're trying to solve a puzzle box," he'd said, his voice warm and amused. I remember stammering something about the cold, about my fingers not working. He just laughed, a sound like stones skipping across calm water. "I'm Alex," he said, holding out a hand that was still slightly damp. I took it. "Leo," I replied. And that was it. No thunderclap, no dramatic music. Just a simple exchange, a moment of casual kindness. But for me, it was the first frame of a very, very long film. We became friends in the way that happens in college, a slow, organic process fueled by proximity and shared exhaustion. I was the art student who lived in the darkroom. He was the kinesiology major who lived in the pool. Our worlds should not have intersected so completely, but they did. It started with him asking for copies of my photos. He wanted to see his form, to analyze his stroke, his turn, his kick. I would bring him the prints, and we would sit in the library or on the worn-out couches of the student union, and he would trace the lines of his own body with his finger, murmuring about drag coefficients and water displacement. I, in turn, would talk about light and shadow, about capturing the moment of peak exertion, the story held in a single, strained muscle. He listened. He actually listened, with an intensity that surprised me. He asked questions about aperture and shutter speed, about why I chose one angle over another. He saw the art in my science, and I saw the science in his art. Soon, the photo analysis sessions bled into study sessions, which bled into late-night pizza runs and conversations that lasted until the sun threatened the horizon. We discovered we were a good team. His disciplined energy helped pull me out of my creative funks, and my quiet steadiness seemed to ground him when the pressure of competition became too much. We were the oddest of pairs, the bright, shining star of the swim team and the quiet, observant boy who lived behind the camera. But it worked. It worked so well that when we graduated, the idea of not living in the same city, of not having that easy, constant proximity, felt like a physical amputation. So we got an apartment together. It was a logical, practical decision. We split the rent. We knew each other's habits. It just made sense. And for 2 years, it was exactly that. A sensible, comfortable arrangement. A friendship that had become as essential and as unexamined as breathing. The moment I knew I was in love with him is etched into my memory with the painful clarity of a photograph I can never unsee. It was not a grand, cinematic revelation. It was small and stupid, and it happened under a set of cold, metal bleachers during a homecoming football game our junior year. We weren't even there for the game. We were just cutting through the athletic fields on our way back from somewhere else. It had started to rain, a sudden, cold autumn downpour. We ducked under the bleachers to wait it out, the sound of the rain on the metal above us like a frantic drum solo. We were laughing about something. I don't even remember what. Alex was leaning against one of the metal supports, water dripping from his hair, his face illuminated by the distant glow of the stadium lights filtering through the gaps in the seats above. And in the middle of a laugh, he just stopped. He looked at me, his smile fading into something softer, more questioning. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the sound of the rain and our own breathing. He leaned in, and I, in a state of suspended disbelief, leaned in too. His lips were cold from the rain, and the kiss was clumsy, hesitant, tasting of beer and damp air. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then he pulled back, a look of profound confusion on his face. He blinked, shook his head slightly as if to clear it, and then gave a short, awkward laugh. "Whoa, sorry man. Weird moment," he said, clapping me on the shoulder in that aggressively casual way people do when they want to erase something that just happened. He never mentioned it again. The next day, it was as if it had been wiped from his memory, a glitch in the system that had been rebooted and corrected. But for me, it was indelible. It was the moment the quiet, manageable river of my affection for him breached its banks and became a flood. It was my first kiss with a boy. It was my first kiss with him. And he had dismissed it as a weird moment. I learned a valuable lesson that day under the bleachers. My feelings were a territory to be kept secret, a map to be hidden away. To reveal them would be to risk, not just rejection, but the complete demolition of the friendship that had become my home. So I packed it away. I filed that memory under anomalies and built thicker, higher walls around my heart. I became an expert in the art of being his friend, his confidant, his anchor, all while a silent, secret part of me was drowning. I watched him date. There was Jessica, and then Chloe, and then, most seriously, Sarah. Sarah was nice. She was smart and funny, and she clearly adored him. I liked her, which made it all the more painful. I photographed their happiness. I took pictures of them at parties, laughing, holding hands. I developed the film, my hands steady in the chemical baths, while my insides felt corroded. I would hand him the prints, and he would smile, a genuine, uncomplicated smile of a man in love, and I would smile back, my own expression a carefully composed masterpiece of platonic affection. When he and Sarah broke up, a year before we moved into our apartment, he was devastated. He showed up at my dorm room late at night, his eyes red-rimmed, holding a 6-pack of terrible beer. He didn't talk much. He just sat on my floor, drinking slowly, while I worked on an editing project. After the 3rd beer, he finally spoke. "I just don't get it," he said, his voice thick. "I thought she was it. You know, I knew. I knew better than he could ever imagine." I just nodded, and I let him stay, let him fall into a fitful sleep on my lumpy futon. In the morning, he was all apologies and awkward gratitude. But something had shifted. He had come to me. In his moment of absolute heartbreak, I was the one he sought out. It was a small, fragile seed of hope that I knew I should have crushed, but instead, I tucked it away in the dark and secretly, foolishly, watered it. So for years, this was our dynamic. A deep, resilient, and profoundly asymmetrical friendship. I knew every gear in the complex machinery of his heart, while he remained blissfully unaware of the most fundamental component of mine. Our apartment was our shared territory, a space of easy comfort and unspoken rules. His side of the living room was a controlled explosion of textbooks, workout gear, and discarded protein shake bottles. My side was a neat grid of camera equipment, photography books, and meticulously organized hard drives. We orbited each other in a comfortable, predictable pattern. It was a good life. It was a safe life. And until the pressure of the trials began to mount, I had convinced myself it was enough. I had accepted my role as the harbor. I had never imagined he would try to teach me how to be the sea. The shift, when it came, wasn't a single seismic event, but a series of tremors that preceded the earthquake. The Olympic trials had been a distant, abstract goal for as long as I'd known Alex. It was the sun his entire life orbited around. But as they drew closer, the abstraction became a crushing, tangible weight. His life narrowed to a pinpoint focus. Eat, sleep, swim, repeat. The joyous energy that had once defined him began to curdle into a grim, relentless drive. He grew leaner, quieter, the light in his eyes dimming into a banked coal of anxiety. He was still Alex, but a version of him that had been stripped of all its non-essential parts, honed down to a single, desperate purpose. He stopped going out with friends. He stopped calling his parents as often. His world shrank to the dimensions of a 50-meter pool and the four walls of our apartment. I became his primary point of contact with the world outside of chlorine and stopwatches. I made sure there was food in the fridge that fit his rigid dietary plan. I did the laundry when his piles of damp towels threatened to achieve sentience. I was the one who listened to him dissect his times down to the hundredth of a second, who absorbed his frustration when he plateaued, who offered quiet encouragement when his confidence wavered. I was performing the duties of a partner, all under the convenient, bulletproof guise of being a good roommate. It was a dangerous game. Every small act of care was a betrayal of my own carefully constructed defenses, a tiny chip in the wall I had spent years building. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what any good friend would do. I told myself 1,000 comforting lies, all while the truth was growing, insistent and undeniable, in the quiet spaces of our shared life. The catalyst arrived on a rainy Saturday in March. He had a major qualifying meet 3 states away. It was the last big hurdle before the official trials. He had been a knot of tension for weeks leading up to it, sleeping poorly, eating mechanically, his conversations reduced to monosyllabic reports on his physical state. I didn't go with him. He had insisted he needed to be completely focused, and I understood. The role of the observer was one I knew well. So I stayed home, tracking the results online, my stomach twisting with a sympathetic anxiety that was so intense it felt like my own. I watched the live feed, my camera lying forgotten on my desk. I saw him on the block, his face a mask of concentration. I saw him dive, a clean, powerful entry. I watched him pull ahead, his form flawless, a machine of muscle and will. He was going to do it. He was going to smash his personal best, to send a message to every other swimmer in the country. And then, on the final turn, something happened. A tiny slip, a fractional hesitation. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. But I saw it. I had watched him swim thousands of miles, and I saw the infinitesimal break in his rhythm. He lost the lead in the last 10 meters. He came in second, a silver medal that, to him, was nothing but a testament to failure. He drove home through the night, refusing to stop and get a hotel. He walked through the door of our apartment just as the sun was rising, looking like a ghost. He was pale, his eyes hollowed out, dark bruises of exhaustion beneath them. He dropped his gear bag by the door with a heavy thud that seemed to echo the collapse of his ambitions. He didn't say a word. He just walked into the living room and stood there, staring out the window at the gray, unforgiving dawn. I had been up all night, waiting for him. I had rehearsed a dozen speeches, a dozen different ways to offer comfort and perspective. But looking at him then, so utterly broken, all the words felt like cheap, useless trinkets. So I said nothing. I just went to the kitchen and made him a cup of tea, the way he liked it, with honey and a slice of lemon. I put the mug into his hands, which were cold and trembling slightly. He took it, his fingers wrapping around the warmth. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a despair so vast it terrified me. "I lost it, Leo," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was right there. And I lost it," He took a shaky sip of the tea and then set the mug down on the windowsill. He sank onto the couch, not sitting so much as deflating, his body folding in on itself. I sat down in the armchair opposite him, keeping a careful, respectful distance. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall, measuring out the seconds of his defeat. I expected him to eventually get up and go to his room, to retreat into himself as he always did when things were bad. But he didn't. Instead, he lay down on the couch, curling into a fetal position, his back to me. "Could you just stay?" he asked, his voice muffled by the cushions. "I don't want to talk. Just don't leave me alone." It was the first time he had ever asked for my presence so explicitly, so vulnerably. It was a request, but it felt like a plea. So I stayed. I sat in that armchair for hours, reading a book I wasn't comprehending, my attention fixed on the still, silent shape of my friend on the couch. I listened to his breathing, which slowly, gradually, evened out as he fell into a sleep born of pure emotional and physical depletion. That was the day the tremors started. The day he first admitted, without saying the words, that he needed me in a way that went beyond friendship, beyond roommateship. He needed an anchor in the storm of his own life. And I, fool that I was more than willing to let him chain himself to me, even if it meant I would be pulled under with him. From that day forward, the geography of our apartment began to change. The unspoken territories we had always respected started to blur. The couch, once a neutral zone, became his default location. He would come home from practice, his body aching and his spirit bruised, and he would collapse onto it, not even bothering to change out of his damp sweats. And he would wait for me to join him. It was never a demand, never an explicit request. It was an expectation, held in the quiet, waiting stillness of his body. And I would always acquiesce. I would finish whatever I was doing, grab a blanket, and settle into my usual spot at the other end of the sofa. At first, that was all it was. We would watch television, or listen to music, or just sit in a companionable silence, the length of the couch a safe, respectable distance between us. It was a fragile truce with the growing intimacy between us, a way of acknowledging it without having to name it. But the distance began to shrink. It happened by degrees, a slow, incremental creep. One night, he complained of the cold, a deep, cellular chill he said he couldn't shake since the disastrous meet. I draped the blanket over both of us. Our legs, separated by inches of worn fabric, were now under a single cover. I could feel the heat radiating from him, a low, constant furnace. My own body felt hyper-aware, every nerve ending firing, cataloging the new proximity. A few nights later, under the pretext of being too tired to even hold his head up, he rested it against the arm of the sofa, his hair brushing against my arm. I froze, my muscles locking, but he seemed not to notice or not to care. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and relaxed into the position. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of suspended animation, afraid to move my arm, my skin tingling where his hair touched it. Then came the night of the first real cuddle. It was a fiction we co-authored, a piece of plausible deniability we constructed together without a single word of consultation. We were watching some forgettable movie, the kind with lots of explosions that required no emotional investment. Alex had fallen asleep, or so I thought. His breathing was deep and even. Slowly, over the course of several minutes, he listed sideways, his body slumping towards mine until his head came to rest on my shoulder. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I was sure he would wake up, would jolt away with an embarrassed apology. But he didn't. He just settled in, murmuring something incoherent and snuggling closer, his arm finding its way around my waist, his hand resting on my hip. I was rigid with shock and a terrifying, exhilarating joy. I sat there, a statue with a wildly beating heart, for the entire rest of the movie. When the credits rolled, I gently tried to shift him, to extricate myself. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, his gaze hazy with sleep, and he smiled. A soft, unguarded, devastating smile. "This is nice," he murmured, and then he closed his eyes again, his grip on my waist tightening slightly. He wasn't asleep. He had been awake the whole time. He had done it on purpose. That night, the dam broke. The pretense was gone, replaced by a new, unspoken ritual. Movie night became our code. It meant Alex would end up with his head in my lap or curled against my side, his arms slung around me, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. We never talked about it. We never acknowledged the shift the morning after. We would wake up, him on the couch, me in my bed, and we would make coffee and talk about his training schedule or my latest project as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The air in our apartment was now permanently charged with a low-grade electrical current. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared silence was loaded with a new weight, a new meaning that I was desperately trying to decipher. I became a scholar of his smallest gestures. The way his thumb would sometimes stroke my side when he thought I was asleep. The way he would find my hand under the blanket and his fingers would just rest against mine, not holding, but near, so very near. I was living in a state of constant, heightened awareness, my senses dialed up to their highest sensitivity. I was drowning in sensory data and starving for a single, unambiguous word. Was this just about comfort for him? Was I just a convenient, warm body, a human security blanket to help him through the darkest period of his life? Or was it something more? Was it possible that the weird moment under the bleachers all those years ago hadn't been an anomaly, but a preview? A seed that had laid dormant all this time, only now beginning to sprout in the dark? The anxiety was a constant companion, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my days. I was terrified of misinterpreting the signals, of seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was actually there. Ruining our friendship was still my greatest fear, but a new fear had joined it. The fear that this ambiguous, torturous intimacy was all it would ever be. I was living on scraps, on the crumbs of affection he offered, and I was starving. The most potent symbol of this new, liminal space we inhabited was his bedroom door. He began leaving it open. Not wide open, but ajar, a 6-inch gap that felt like a chasm. It was an invitation I never dared to accept. Some nights, I would lie awake in my own bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his restless tossing and turning through that open door. I would imagine getting up, walking the 10 feet down the hallway, and slipping into his bed. I would imagine curling up behind him, wrapping my arms around him, and finally feeling the relief of a truth spoken, of a boundary crossed intentionally. But I never did. The fear was too great. The risk was too high. The open door was a question, and I was too much of a coward to give an answer. This ritual, our silent arrangement of comfort and ambiguity, continued for weeks, stretching into a month, then 2. It became our new normal, a routine so ingrained that the nights we didn't end up on the couch together felt strange and empty. The trials were looming, a massive storm system on the horizon, and Alex's need for this quiet harbor grew more acute with each passing day. He was a tightly wound spring, and our evenings on the couch seemed to be the only thing that allowed him to uncoil, even just a little. I, in turn, had grown addicted to the closeness, to the feeling of his weight against me, to the simple, profound act of providing comfort. It was a painful, beautiful stasis. We were trapped in the amber of our unspoken arrangement, perfectly preserved and unable to move forward or back. I knew something had to give. The tension had been building for too long. The structure we had built could not bear this much weight indefinitely. A choice had to be made. A line had to be crossed. I just never imagined he would be the one to do it. The night it happened was unremarkable, which in retrospect feels fitting. It was a Thursday. Rain was streaking down the window panes, blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. Alex had endured a particularly grueling practice, a Hell Week simulation designed to break the swimmers down and build them back up. He had come home looking hollowed out, his movements slow and deliberate, as if each one cost him something vital. He didn't even bother with the pretense of wanting to eat or shower. He just dropped his bag, pulled off his damp sweatshirt, and collapsed onto the couch, pulling the familiar, worn blanket over himself. I was at my desk, trying to edit a set of photos, but the anxiety radiating from him was a physical presence in the room, making it impossible to concentrate. I gave up, turned off my monitor, and went to sit with him. I took my usual spot, and he, without opening his eyes, immediately shifted, rolling onto his side to face me and resting his head in my lap. It was our standard configuration, the position we had perfected over dozens of nights. But tonight, it felt different. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy, thick with everything we had so carefully avoided saying. I rested my hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, another part of our established ritual. I could feel the tension in his muscles, the frantic energy still thrumming just beneath his skin. The rain drummed a soft, relentless rhythm against the glass. The only other sound was our breathing, which felt unnervously loud in the quiet room. I stared at the television, which was off, its blank screen reflecting our dim, static tableau. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between us, the weight of his head on my thighs, the warmth of his back under my palm, the way his knee was pressed against my leg. It was an agony of closeness. He was so still I thought he had fallen asleep. But then he spoke, his voice low and rough, barely more than a whisper, not directed at me, but at the room, at the air between us. Leo. My heart stuttered. It was the way he said my name. Not the casual, easy way he usually did, but with a strange, tentative weight, as if the word itself was fragile and might break. I looked down at him. His eyes were open, staring up at the ceiling, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I cleared my throat, which felt suddenly dry. Yeah, I managed to say, my own voice sounding foreign and strained. He was silent for a long moment, a pause so profound I could feel the universe holding its breath. I felt the muscles in his back tense under my hand. He was gathering his courage. For what? I had no idea, and every possibility that flashed through my mind was more terrifying than the last. He was going to end this. He was going to apologize, to say it had all been a mistake, a weird phase brought on by stress. He was going to put the walls back up, thicker and higher than before. I braced myself for the impact. But the words he finally spoke were not the ones I expected. He turned his head, his gaze finally meeting mine. His eyes, the color of the ocean just before a storm, were filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and resolve. Would it be weird, he started, his voice cracking on the last word. He swallowed hard and started again, the whisper even quieter this time. So quiet I felt it more than heard it. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The rain, the clock, my own frantic heart, it all went silent. There was only his question, hanging in the air between us, a beautiful, terrifying, impossible thing. It was the question I had been dreaming of and dreading for years. It was the key to everything, the answer that could either open the door to a world I desperately wanted or lock it forever. All the air left my lungs in a silent rush. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My entire existence had narrowed to this single point, this one decision. I thought of the Bleachers, of the cold, clumsy kiss in the rain that he had dismissed and I had enshrined. This was not that. This was not a drunken, weird moment. This was a conscious choice. This was a deliberate step onto the fragile bridge I had been building towards him in my heart for years. He must have seen the torrent of emotion in my eyes, the hope, the fear, the disbelief. His own face was a canvas of vulnerability. He was offering me the most fragile part of himself, and the terror of it was written in the slight tremble of his lower lip. He started to pull back, to retreat, misinterpreting my stunned silence as rejection. Sorry, he mumbled, his gaze dropping. Forget it. That was stupid. I'm sorry, but I couldn't let him. I couldn't let him take it back. My body moved before my brain could catch up. My free hand came up and gently cupped his jaw, my thumb stroking his cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of reality. His skin was warm, the stubble rough against my palm. He stopped trying to pull away, his eyes wide, searching mine for an answer I still couldn't voice. So I gave him one. I nodded. Just a small, single, decisive movement. He let out a shaky breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. He pushed himself up slowly, moving from my lap to kneel on the couch in front of me. He didn't rush. The space between us was sacred now, and he treated it with a reverence that made my heart ache. He mirrored my gesture, his hand coming up to cup the side of my face, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was so gentle, so tentative, it was almost unbearable. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was nothing like the one under the bleachers. It was not cold, or clumsy, or accidental. It was warm, and soft, and breathtakingly intentional. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was a confession. It tasted of rain and salt and years of unspoken longing. It was the quietest, most earth-shattering moment of my life. We stayed like that for a long time, our foreheads resting together, our hands still holding each other's faces, just breathing in the new, incredible, terrifying atmosphere we had created. The ritual was broken. The line was crossed, and I had no idea what came next. The morning after felt like waking up in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. The air itself seemed to have a different density, a different texture. When I came out of my room, the apartment was silent and still. Alex was already gone. His running shoes were missing from their spot by the door, and a clean coffee mug was sitting in the drying rack. He had woken up, made coffee, and left for an early workout without a word, without a sound. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, settled in my stomach. I had been so sure, in the aftermath of the kiss, that everything had changed for the better. We had fallen asleep on the couch together, tangled up in a way that was new and deliberate, his head on my chest, my arms securely around him. It had felt like a resolution, like the end of a long, painful story and the beginning of a new one. But his silent departure felt like a retraction, a negation of everything that had passed between us. I spent the day in a fog of anxiety. I tried to work, but the photos on my screen were just meaningless arrangements of pixels. I kept replaying the kiss in my mind, searching it for clues, for evidence. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had I misinterpreted the vulnerability in his eyes? My mind, my greatest tool for observation and analysis, had become my tormentor, presenting 1,000 different scenarios, each one more painful than the last. The worst was the simplest. He regretted it. The stress, the exhaustion, the emotional turmoil of the trials. It had all led him to a moment of confusion, a desperate reach for comfort that had gone too far. And now, in the clear, cold light of day, he was horrified by what he had done. He had crossed a line and was now frantically scrambling back to the safety of our old, familiar friendship, leaving me alone on the other side. He didn't come home until late that evening. I heard his key in the lock, and my entire body tensed. I was sitting on the couch, in the exact spot where it had all happened, the room dark except for a single lamp. I felt like a prosecutor waiting for a defendant to take the stand. He walked in, his gym bag slung over his shoulder, and he stopped short when he saw me, a deer caught in the headlights. His face was pale, his expression guarded and exhausted. The easy grace he normally carried was gone, replaced by a stiff, awkward tension. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, directed at the floor somewhere between us. He started to walk towards his room, a clear, unmistakable retreat. The dread in my stomach turned to a hot, sharp anger. Anger at him for his cowardice, and anger at myself for letting my hope run so wild. I couldn't let him just walk away. I couldn't let him erase last night with this suffocating silence. "Alex," my voice was sharper than I intended. He stopped, his back still to me. "Don't," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Don't you dare just walk away. Don't pretend it didn't happen." He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders hunched. When he finally turned around, his face was a mask of misery. "Leo," he started, but his voice trailed off. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. I'm tired. It's been a long day." It was a pathetic excuse, a flimsy shield, and it made me even angrier. "So was last night just a long day too?" I asked, the words dripping with a bitterness I hadn't known I was capable of. "Was that just another weird moment? Because you need to tell me. If I'm just your stress ball, your human heating pad, I think I have a right to know." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. His eyes were swimming with a confusion and pain that mirrored my own. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. God, no. It wasn't that. It's not that. You're not that, then what is it? I pressed, standing up, closing the distance between us. I needed an answer. I couldn't live in this gray area for one more second. What are we doing, Alex? What was that last night? Because it felt real to me. And if I was wrong, if I imagined it all, you need to tell me right now so I can figure out how to put myself back together. He finally broke. A strangled sob escaped his throat, a sound of such profound despair it shattered my anger, leaving only a deep, aching sorrow in its place. He sank onto the edge of the armchair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent, ragged breaths. I don't know, he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. Leo, I swear to God, I don't know. He looked up at me, his face ravaged, his eyes red and pleading. I'm so confused. I don't feel this way. About guys. I'm not. This isn't who I am. The words were a torrent of panic and self-negation. He was trying to reconcile the undeniable truth of what he felt for me with the entire lifetime of identity he had built for himself. The confident athlete, the popular guy who dated pretty girls, that was Alex. This scared, confused man in front of me was a stranger to him, and he was terrified. All I know, he continued, his voice dropping to a raw, honest whisper, is that for the last few months, the only time I feel safe, the only time the noise in my head stops, is when I'm with you. On that couch. It's the only place I can breathe. And last night I needed more. I needed to know if it was real. He looked at me, his expression desperate. And it was so real. And that's what's scaring the hell out of me. Because I don't know what it means. And I am so scared of ruining the one good thing I have in my life right now. Of ruining us. His confession, in all its messy, terrified honesty, was more potent than any declaration of love could ever have been. He wasn't rejecting me. He was terrified of his own feelings. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, overwhelming tenderness. This wasn't his fault. It was the fault of a world that draws lines and builds boxes and tells you who you're supposed to be. I knelt in front of him, taking his hands, pulling them away from his face. His skin was cold, his fingers trembling in mine. Hey, I said softly, forcing him to look at me. Look at me. You're not ruining anything. We're not ruined. I squeezed his hands. You're not alone in this. Okay, you think I'm not scared? I've been terrified for years. The admission hung in the air between us, my own confession, offered in exchange for his. His eyes widened, a flicker of understanding dawning in their depths. Years, he whispered. I gave a small, sad smile. Since some bleachers in the rain, his breath hitched, a sudden, sharp intake of air. A ghost of a memory, a weird moment he had tried to bury, was suddenly, shockingly, resurrected. The past and the present had finally collided. And in the wreckage, we were finally ready to talk. That conversation was not a magic wand. It did not instantly solve everything or erase the years of silence and misunderstanding. It was long, and it was difficult, stretching late into the night. It was punctuated by long pauses, by fumbling attempts to articulate feelings that had never been given voice, by moments of frustration and fear. But it was honest. For the first time, we were utterly, terrifyingly honest with each other. I told him everything. I told him about the bleachers, and how that clumsy, forgotten kiss had completely rewired my world. I told him about the quiet ache of watching him with Sarah, of the years I had spent carefully policing my own heart, of the terror and hope I had felt over these last few months. I laid my entire history of loving him out on the table, a vulnerable and fragile offering. And he, in turn, talked. He talked about the immense pressure he was under, the feeling that his entire identity was tied to his performance in the pool. He talked about a deep, persistent loneliness that his social life and past relationships had never managed to touch. He admitted that the comfort he found with me was different, deeper than anything he had ever known. It wasn't just physical. It was a sense of being seen, of being known, in a way that didn't require performance. He didn't have the words for it yet. He couldn't label it, couldn't fit it into the neat categories he was used to. But he knew it was real. He knew it was important. And he knew, with a certainty that had scared him to his core, that it was me. It had always, somehow, been me. We didn't solve the world that night. We didn't define our relationship or plan a future. All we did was agree to stop being afraid. We agreed to face the confusion together, to take it one day at a time. We made a pact of patience, with ourselves and with each other. It was enough. It was more than enough. When the sun began to rise, painting the gray sky in strokes of pink and orange, we were both utterly exhausted, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. It was the clean, honest fatigue that comes after a long and necessary journey. We had navigated the storm and found our way back to shore, not on opposite sides, but together. The days that followed were a process of gentle rediscovery. We were learning a new language, a new way of being with each other. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a quiet intentionality. A touch was no longer a question, but a statement. A shared glance was no longer a risk, but a confirmation. The first time we sat on the couch after our talk, there was a moment of hesitation, a brief, shared memory of the old ritual. Then Alex reached out, took my hand, and laced his fingers through mine. He pulled me closer, and I went willingly, settling against his side. There was no movie, no pretext of sleepiness. There was just us, choosing to be close, choosing to hold on. It was simple, and it was profound. His bedroom door, which had been the symbol of my own cowardice and our shared uncertainty, took on a new meaning. One night, a week or so after our talk, he was standing in the doorway of his room, ready to go to bed. He looked at me, a soft, questioning look in his eyes. He didn't have to say a word. I stood up from my desk, walked down the hallway, and stepped across the threshold. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and he closed the door behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the most reassuring sound I had ever heard. It wasn't the sound of being trapped, but of being safe, of being home. We began to build our new normal in the quiet, domestic spaces of our life. In the morning, we would make coffee together, moving around each other in the small kitchen in a comfortable, easy dance. I would watch him stretch before practice, no longer just an observer with a camera, but a participant in his life, my presence a source of strength for him, not just a silent witness. He would come into my workspace and watch me edit photos, wrapping his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, his quiet support a balm to my own creative anxieties. The grand, terrifying emotions of the previous months settled into a gentle, steady rhythm of shared days and peaceful nights. We were healing, together, in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned how to create. Some things are not built in a day. They are not grand cathedrals constructed with dramatic gestures and loud declarations. Some things, the things that truly last, are built slowly, quietly, over time. They are assembled from 1,000 small moments of trust, 1,000,000 tiny acts of kindness. They are reinforced by shared laughter and patient understanding. They are the structures we build not to impress the world, but to shelter the people we love. Our story wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, careful act of construction. We were two people learning to lay a new foundation, right over the cracked and unsteady ground of our past. And it was strong. It was real. It was ours. And we were finally ready to live inside it.